Hey there, wonderful viewers. If you're enjoying my content, please take a second to hit that like button. It really helps the YouTube algorithm show my videos to more people. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Now grab your favorite drink, sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's story. I promise it'll be worth your time. I never should have come to Utah. That's what I keep telling myself as I sit here in this trailer, hands trembling so badly I can barely type. My name is Michael, and 3 days ago, my life became a waking nightmare. It was supposed to be a simple job. My friend Josh and I had driven out to this desolate stretch of land to do some surveying work for a small construction company. The pay was good, almost suspiciously good, but we needed the money and the work seemed straightforward. The property sits about 20 miles from the nearest town, bordering a Native American reservation roughly 200 feet to the east. Nothing but scrubland, dust, and silence. The first day went fine. We set up our trailer, organized our equipment, and even managed to get a decent amount of work done before sunset. We grilled some burgers outside, had a few beers, and talked about what we'd do with the money. Josh was saving for a new transmission for his motorcycle. I was just trying to pay off some debt. That night I woke up around 3 a.m., not sure what had disturbed me. The air felt dense, almost pressurized, like the moment before a severe storm. I lay there in the darkness, listening to Josh's steady breathing from the other side of the trailer, trying to identify what had pulled me from sleep. Then I heard it, a soft, deliberate scratching along the outer wall. Not the random scraping of a branch or bush, but something purposeful, something with intent. I convinced myself it was just an animal, a coyote or maybe a raccoon, and eventually fell back into an uneasy sleep. I didn't mention it to Josh the next morning. No reason to seem paranoid over what was probably nothing, but that was the beginning. That was when it found us. By the second day, we both knew something was wrong. "Do you smell that?" Josh asked, wrinkling his nose as he climbed into the truck to fetch some equipment. I did. It was unmistakable. The sickening stench of sulfur mixed with the nauseating sweetness of rotting meat. The smell permeated everything, seeping into the upholstery and clinging to our clothes. "Did you leave something in here?" I asked, helping him search the truck. We checked under seats, in the glove compartment, even pulled up the floor mats. Nothing. When we returned to the trailer that evening, the same putrid odor greeted us there too. We spent an hour searching, checking every corner, cabinet, and crevice. The trailer was clean, spotless even, yet the stench remained, growing stronger as the hours passed. That night the scratching returned. No longer confined to one wall, it moved around the trailer, sometimes on the roof, sometimes near the windows. Accompanying it was a new sound, a rhythmic tapping like knuckles against glass. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. "You hear that, right?" Josh whispered from his bed. "Yeah," I replied, my mouth dry. "I hear it." "What the hell is it?" I had no answer. Here in the vastness of the Utah wilderness, 20 miles from civilization, there shouldn't be anyone or anything capable of making those sounds. The tapping continued for hours, stopping only with the first pale light of dawn. Neither of us slept. How could we, with that persistent reminder that something was outside, something that wanted in? On the third day, we abandoned any pretense of working. The smell had grown so intense that we could barely stand to be in the truck or trailer. Our eyes watered constantly and my stomach churned with nausea. "We need to figure out what this is," Josh said, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "Whatever's out there, I'm tired of being hunted." I nodded in agreement, though every instinct screamed against the idea of pursuing whatever was stalking us. But Josh was right. We couldn't continue like this, jumping at every sound and unable to sleep. We needed answers. As dusk approached, we gathered our equipment, powerful flashlights, a rifle Josh had brought just in case, and our phones with location services enabled in case we got separated. We set out on foot, following a narrow game trail that led away from our camp and deeper into the empty landscape. The temperature dropped rapidly as darkness fell. Wind whispered through the sparse vegetation, carrying dust that stung our eyes and throat. We walked in silence for nearly 2 miles, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness, revealing nothing but rocks and stunted plants. Then, without warning, the sulfur stench hit us like a wall. "We're close," Josh whispered unnecessarily. I could feel it too, a heaviness in the air, a wrongness that made my skin crawl. I swept my flashlight in a wide arc, searching the darkness. The beam caught something, a brief reflection like eyes gleaming in the night, and then it was gone. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Before Josh could answer, we both froze. Silhouetted against the night sky, approximately 50 yards ahead, stood a figure. Tall, impossibly tall, at least 6 or 7 feet in height. It was unnaturally thin and completely motionless. Even at that distance, I could feel its attention fixed solely on us. "Josh," I whispered, unable to tear my gaze away from the figure. "Josh, what is that?" The figure moved. Not a step, not a walk, but a sudden, unnatural rush toward us. Its limbs moved wrong, too fluid and too jerky all at once, covering ground at an impossible speed. We ran. There was no discussion, no plan, just pure animal fear propelling us back toward our truck. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but terror pushed me forward. I could hear Josh beside me, his breathing ragged and panicked. Behind us, gaining with every second, came the sound of pursuit. Not the pounding of feet, but something else. A strange, sliding whisper across the ground, punctuated by sharp cracks like breaking twigs. We reached the truck, fumbling with the doors in our panic. Inside, the stench was overwhelming, but it was our only chance. I turned the key and the engine sputtered but wouldn't catch. Come on, I pleaded, trying again. Nothing. Josh swore, his face ghastly pale in the dim light. "It's getting closer." I made a decision. I need to check the engine. Keep watch. Stepping out into the night was the hardest thing I've ever done. The cold air hit me like a physical blow as I moved to the toolbox mounted on the truck's side. My hands shook violently as I grabbed a wrench and began removing the intake cover. Every second felt like an hour. Every sound in the darkness sent fresh waves of terror through me. I worked by feel as much as sight, spraying ether into the intake and hastily reassembling it. "Hurry!" Josh's voice came from inside the cab, high and tight with fear. I slammed the hood down and dove back into the driver's seat, turning the key again. This time the engine roared to life. I threw it into gear and floored the accelerator, tires spinning in the loose dirt before finding purchase. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but empty land ahead. The speedometer climbed 30, 40, 50, but then stopped at 53 miles per hour. The engine whined but wouldn't go faster. "Something's wrong," I said, pressing harder on the pedal. "It should be able to hit at least 70. Josh was twisted around in his seat, staring out the rear window. "It's still coming," he said, his voice hollow with disbelief. I checked the rearview mirror and felt my stomach drop. Behind us, moving with the same unnatural speed, was the figure. Despite our head start and the truck's speed, it was gaining on us. "It's not possible," I whispered, watching as it drew closer. "Nothing can run that fast. Floor it," Josh screamed. "It's right behind us." I pushed the pedal to the floor, but the truck refused to accelerate beyond 55. The engine struggled, making a high-pitched whine that seemed to mirror my own internal screaming. The mile back to our trailer stretched into an eternity. Every second I expected to feel hands, or something worse, grabbing at the truck, pulling us back into the darkness. We reached the trailer and abandoned the truck, not even bothering to shut it off properly. We sprinted the short distance to the door, threw ourselves inside, and slammed it shut behind us. Josh turned the deadbolt while I grabbed blankets to cover the windows. "What was that thing?" Josh gasped, sliding down against the wall. I shook my head, unable to form words as I frantically covered the last window. The moment I finished, something hit the door, not a knock, but a violent impact that made the entire trailer shudder. "It found us," I whispered. Josh grabbed a kitchen knife while I positioned myself against the door, feeling it vibrate with each new impact. The pounding stopped suddenly, replaced by the sound of something scraping along the trailer's exterior, circling us. Then, impossibly, the deadbolt began to turn on its own. I watched in horror as the lock slowly rotated toward the open position. Josh saw it too and threw himself against the door with me. "Find something to block it," I shouted. He grabbed a bootlace from his work boots and tied it around the lock mechanism, securing it in the locked position. The knob continued to turn against the restraint, the lace stretching but holding. I grabbed a hammer, pathetic defense but better than nothing, and stood ready. We waited in terrified silence, listening to the thing outside as it continued to circle the trailer. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. I pulled it out with shaking hands and saw a text from Megan, a girl I'd been interested in for months but who never responded to my messages. "I'm in trouble. Need you to come get me right now," the text read. I showed it to Josh, who frowned. "That's weird timing," I replied, asking what was happening. "Getting kicked out of the house. Please hurry." Something felt wrong. Why would she contact me now after months of silence? And how did she even know where I was? I asked if she had money for diesel, a question that would make no sense if she didn't know I was out of town in my truck. Her reply sent ice through my veins. "Why would I want to see you? We haven't talked in months." "She didn't send the first messages," Josh whispered, looking from the phone to the door, which had finally stopped moving. That's when the voices started, coming from just outside the trailer, familiar voices calling my name. My brother's voice, my mother's voice, even Josh's voice somehow, despite him sitting right beside me. "Michael, please help me. Michael, I'm hurt out here. Michael, let me in." Each voice was almost perfect, but with something subtly wrong, an inflection slightly off, a rhythm not quite human. We survived that night through a combination of luck and desperation. Josh remembered something his grandmother had taught him about protective circles of salt. We found a container in the kitchen and poured lines across every threshold. Whether it actually helped or the thing simply grew tired of tormenting us, the voices eventually stopped, and the oppressive feeling of being watched began to fade. Neither of us slept. We sat back to back in the center of the trailer, weapons in hand, jumping at every creak and groan of the metal structure around us. Dawn arrived with agonizing slowness. As the first gray light filtered through the covered windows, the atmosphere changed. The heaviness lifted and the rotten smell that had permeated everything began to dissipate. When we finally worked up the courage to look outside, we found nothing. No footprints in the dust. No scratches on the trailer's exterior. No sign that anything had happened at all. "Maybe we imagined it," Josh said, his voice hollow with exhaustion. I shook my head. "Both of us? The same thing?" We checked the truck next. It started immediately, the engine purring normally. When Josh tested it on the dirt road, it easily hit 70 miles per hour. We should have left then. Packed up and driven away, job be damned. But where would we go? I had no home to return to, having given up my apartment to take this job. Josh was in a similar situation, and some irrational part of me worried that leaving wouldn't matter, that whatever had found us would simply follow. So I sat down and began writing everything that had happened, hoping that documenting it might help me make sense of it, or at the very least leave a record if things went badly. By mid-afternoon, we'd worked up the courage to venture to the reservation. If anyone would know what we were dealing with, it would be the people who had lived on this land for generations. We drove slowly, the truck performing perfectly now, as if nothing had ever been wrong with it. The reservation appeared abandoned at first glance, small clusters of buildings with few signs of life. We stopped several vehicles on the main road asking for information, but were met with suspicious stares and brief, unhelpful responses. "Nobody knows where the tribal office is?" Josh asked after our fifth unsuccessful attempt. An elderly man in a passing pickup finally pointed us toward a small building at the reservation's edge. "Council meets there," he said, "but they won't talk to you." He was right. The building was locked, with a sign indicating office hours only 2 days a week. Today wasn't one of them. As we turned to leave, a young woman approached us from a nearby house. "You're the one staying on the Lyman property," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I admitted. "We're having some problems." She nodded, unsurprised. "That land has history. Bad things happened there." "What kind of bad things?" Josh pressed. She looked uncomfortable. "I shouldn't talk about it. But whatever you've seen or heard, it's not what you think. It's not one of our legends come to life." "Then what is it?" I asked. "Some places hold memory," she said after a long pause. "And some memories are hungry. They feed on fear." She turned to go, then looked back.
"Salt helps."
"Prayer helps more. Don't acknowledge it. Don't give it power." It wasn't the answer I'd hoped for, but it was something, a framework for understanding, and more importantly, for fighting back. On the drive back, we stopped at a gas station and bought every container of salt they had. The clerk gave us an odd look but said nothing. "Do you really think this will work?" Josh asked as we outlined our trailer with thick lines of salt. "I don't know," I admitted. "But what other options do we have?" That night we prepared differently. Instead of hiding, instead of cowering in fear, we followed the woman's advice. We created barriers of salt around the trailer and the truck. We left a single light on but covered the windows. And most importantly, we refused to listen. The scratching started earlier this time, more frantic, more insistent. The smell returned too, but somehow less potent. My flashlight flickered occasionally, but I chose to believe it was just the batteries failing. "Ignore it," I reminded Josh when the voices began again. "Don't give it power." We sat together in the center of the trailer, back to back, and I did something I hadn't done in years. I prayed. Not elaborate prayers, just simple, honest pleas for protection, for strength, for morning to come quickly. The entity seemed to sense our change in strategy. Its attacks grew more desperate, the trailer shaking with impacts, the voices shifting from familiar to monstrous. Inhuman growls and screeches punctuated by words that made no sense. But we held firm. We didn't respond. We didn't look. We didn't acknowledge the horror just outside our walls. And slowly, gradually, it began to recede. By morning, the silence was complete. Not just the absence of the entity's noises, but a deeper quiet, the natural sounds of the desert returning. Birds called in the distance. Wind rustled through the scrub. Normal sounds that had been absent during the entity's presence. We ventured outside cautiously, half expecting to find some sign of the previous night's assault, but again there was nothing. Just dust and rocks and open sky. That day we acquired a dog from a shelter in the nearest town, a large mixed breed with alert ears and a deep bark. If nothing else, he would serve as an early warning system. The dog showed no signs of distress or awareness of anything unusual. He explored the area around the trailer with typical canine enthusiasm, barking at rabbits and digging in the dirt. It's been 2 days now with no further incidents. No smells, no sounds, no sinister texts or calls. The dog remains calm and happy. Even the oppressive feeling of being watched has dissipated. I don't know what was hunting us out here in the Utah wilderness. I don't know why it chose us or why it seems to have left. Was it the salt? The prayers? Our refusal to engage with it? Or did it simply move on to easier prey? Whatever the truth, I'm writing this as a record and a warning. There are things in this world that defy explanation. Things that exist in the spaces between what we know and what we fear. I've felt their attention. I've heard their voices. And I hope to God I never do again. For now, we continue our work, but we maintain our precautions. Salt lines are refreshed daily. Prayers are spoken at dusk. And we never ever answer when something calls our names in the darkness. Because some calls aren't meant to be answered. Some voices aren't meant to be heard. And some things that hunt in the night should be left to hunt alone. I remember how the house felt too big that evening, despite how cramped it usually was. You'd think having 2 brothers around would make me feel safer. But it was just us against this uneasy atmosphere seeping into every corner. The year was 2021, late October, and the desert air carried an unusual chill that seemed to penetrate the old mudstone walls of our family's ranch house. Normally, we'd all be at the annual harvest dinner with the rest of the family, listening to Uncle Miguel's stories while Aunt Rosa complained about the dust getting into everything. The sound of cousins laughing, plates clattering, and the old generator humming would fill the night. Instead, we got stuck tending sheep because someone had to stay behind, and the place felt hollow without our parents' voices echoing through the rooms. The house itself was ancient, built by my great-grandfather with his own hands back when this part of New Mexico was even more isolated than it is now. Adobe walls 3 feet thick, small windows designed to keep out the desert heat, and creaking wooden floors that announced every footstep. On normal nights, those sounds were comforting, familiar. Tonight, they seemed to amplify our isolation. It started with the dogs outside. We had 5 of them. Working dogs, all mutts with sharp instincts honed by generations of ranch life. They barked in this erratic pattern, starting with Bruno, our oldest shepherd mix, then rippling through the pack in waves. It wasn't their usual alert bark when coyotes prowled the perimeter. This was different, urgent, almost desperate, like they couldn't decide if they should attack or flee. My older brother, Miguel Jr., 22 and built like our father with broad shoulders from years of ranch work, said it was probably just coyotes getting bold. They know the trucks are gone, he reasoned, peering through the kitchen window. Probably think they can test their luck with the sheep. My younger brother Carlos, barely 15 but already taller than me, half agreed. He stood by the door, one hand on the deadbolt, staring at it for far too long. Yeah, maybe, he muttered. But I caught the way his fingers drummed against his thigh, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. Me? I acted like nothing was wrong, busying myself with cleaning up our simple dinner of beans and tortillas. But I was lying to myself. At 19, I'd lived on this ranch long enough to know every sound, every rhythm of the night. This wasn't right. The dog's barking had a quality I'd never heard before, raw fear mixed with territorial rage. After dinner, we tried to settle down for the night. The idea was to keep things normal, maintain our routine. We checked the sheep through the window, all 43 accounted for in their pen, huddled together near the lean-to shelter. The sight should have been reassuring, but the way they pressed against each other, heads low, ears flicking constantly, sent unease crawling up my spine. Miguel Jr. bolted the door with the heavy wooden beam our father had carved himself. The sound of it sliding into place usually meant safety, but tonight it felt more like we were locking ourselves in rather than keeping something out. The dogs wouldn't let up. They'd fall silent for 30 seconds, maybe a minute, then explode into frenzied barking again. It wasn't coming from one direction either. Sometimes from the front of the house, sometimes the back, occasionally from the sides. Like whatever had them agitated was circling, probing. Just in time I found myself pacing the length of the house, from the old cast-iron stove that had warmed 3 generations, to the window overlooking the sheep pen, 20 steps one way, 20 steps back. The floorboards groaned under my weight, adding their voice to the symphony of unease. "You're going to wear a hole in the floor," Carlos teased from his spot on the couch, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his own anxiety. He had our grandfather's old rifle across his lap, unloaded, because our parents kept the ammunition locked up, but its presence seemed to comfort him. Miguel Jr. pretended to read a week-old newspaper by lamplight, but I noticed he'd been on the same page for 20 minutes. Every time the dogs erupted, his eyes would flick to the windows, scanning the darkness beyond. Around 10 o'clock, the temperature dropped further. Our breath started misting in the air, which was unusual even for a desert night. I added more wood to the stove, but the heat seemed to dissipate before it could warm the room. The shadows in the corners grew deeper, more substantial, like they were absorbing the light rather than simply existing in its absence. That's when we heard the first scream. It wasn't human. I need to be clear about that. It came from one of the dogs, probably Estrella, our youngest, a sound of pure animal terror that cut off abruptly, leaving a silence so complete it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Miguel Jr. shot to his feet, newspaper falling forgotten to the floor. Carlos's knuckles went white around the rifle stock. We waited, hearts hammering for something, anything, to break that terrible quiet. When the barking resumed, it was different. Fewer voices now, and they sounded farther away, like the pack had retreated from whatever they'd encountered. "We should check on them," I said, though every instinct screamed against going outside. "No." Miguel Jr.'s voice was firm, taking on the authoritative tone he used when our parents left him in charge. "Whatever's out there, we're not going to face it in the dark. The dogs know how to take care of themselves." But I could see the doubt in his eyes. These weren't just animals to us, they were partners, protectors, family. Leaving them to face danger alone went against everything we'd been taught about ranch life. Eventually, exhaustion began to overtake fear. Carlos dozed fitfully on the couch, rifle sliding to the floor with a clatter that made us all jump. Miguel Jr. moved to the rocking chair by the stove, fighting to keep his eyes open. I tried lying down on the rug, using my rolled-up jacket as a pillow, but sleep felt impossible, with adrenaline still coursing through my veins. The silence stretched on. No more barking, no wind. Even the usual chorus of crickets and nightbirds had gone quiet. It was the kind of silence that pressed against your eardrums, that made you strain to hear something, anything, to confirm you hadn't gone deaf. Then around midnight, nature called. Of course it did. My bladder didn't care about the terror lurking outside. I lay there for another 10 minutes, hoping the urge would pass, but it only grew more insistent. "Miguel," I whispered, nudging my brother awake. "I need to use the outhouse." He cracked one eye open, giving me a look that managed to convey annoyance, amusement, and understanding all at once. "Seriously, now? Unless you want me to pee in Mama's good pot?" That got him moving. He grabbed the flashlight from its hook by the door, checked that the batteries were working, then looked at me seriously. "We go together. No wandering off, no investigating strange noises. Straight there and back." I nodded, throat too dry to speak. Miguel Jr. lifted the bar from the door, the wood scraping against the brackets sounding impossibly loud in the quiet house. The door creaked open, revealing a wall of darkness that seemed to press against the threshold. Stepping outside was like entering another world. The moon was 3/4 full, casting everything in sharp silver and black. Our breath clouded in the frigid air, and frost glittered on the sparse grass. The familiar yard looked alien, transformed into a landscape of harsh shadows and uncertain shapes. The sheep were silent, pressed against the far side of their pen. I could see the gleam of their eyes reflecting our flashlight beam, all turned in the same direction, toward the cluster of juniper trees beyond the tool shed. Not a single dog was visible, though I spotted dark shapes that might have been paw prints in the dust. We moved quickly, gravel crunching under our boots. The outhouse stood 20 yards from the main house, a simple wooden structure that great-grandfather had built far enough away to keep odors at bay but close enough for winter nights. Miguel Jr. played the flashlight beam in sweeping arcs, checking behind the water barrel, the truck, anywhere something could hide. "Make it quick," he muttered, taking up position outside the outhouse door like a sentry. I ducked inside, trying to ignore how vulnerable I felt in that tiny wooden box. Through the gaps in the planks I could see slices of the night, moonlit ground, the corner of the house, my brother's boots. The usual outhouse sound seemed amplified, embarrassingly loud in the silence. That's when I heard Miguel Jr. curse, low, sharp, afraid. I burst out of the outhouse to find my brother frozen, flashlight beam fixed on something near our father's truck. At first my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It looked like a person, but wrong somehow. Too tall, limbs too long, moving with a strange, disjointed gait that made my stomach turn. As it stepped into better light, details became clearer, and I wished they hadn't. The figure wore what might have been clothes once, tattered remnants that hung off its emaciated frame. Its skin was pale, not healthy pale, but the color of something that had been underground too long. Dark veins traced patterns across its visible flesh like a roadmap of corruption. But it was the face that made my legs turn to water. Human features stretched and distorted, mouth too wide, eyes sunken so deep they looked like holes punched in white paper. Those eyes reflected our flashlight beam with a reddish glint. Like an animal's, but somehow worse because they held intelligence, malevolent, calculating intelligence. It stood by the truck, one impossibly long arm draped over the cab, head tilted at an angle that hurt to look at, watching us, studying us. A smell reached us then, sweet rot mixed with something chemical like formaldehyde and decay. One of our dogs, Lobo, crept out from under the truck, hackles raised, a growl building in his throat. The thing moved faster than anything that tall and twisted should be able to. Its legs snapped out, catching Lobo in the ribs with a wet crunch. The dog flew through the air, yelping, and hit the ground running, disappearing into the darkness. The other dogs, wherever they'd been hiding, took this as their cue to flee. I heard them crashing through the sagebrush, heading for the hills. Then those horrible eyes fixed on me. The world went red at the edges. Not metaphorically. My vision actually tinted crimson, like looking through blood-stained glass. The smell intensified, coating the back of my throat with its putrid sweetness. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think beyond the primitive certainty that I was looking at something that shouldn't exist. Time stretched like taffy. I was dimly aware of Miguel Jr. stepping out of the outhouse behind me, his sharp intake of breath as he saw what held my attention. The thing's mouth stretched wider, revealing too many teeth, all sharp, all wrong. It took a step toward us, joints bending in ways that defied anatomy. Something inside me snapped. Not broke, snapped back like a rubber band stretched too far. The paralysis shattered, replaced by rage so pure it burned through the fear. This thing was on our land, threatening our home, our family. A sound tore from my throat. Not quite a scream, not quite a roar, but something primal that bypassed thought entirely. I charged. Looking back, it was insane, suicidal. But in that moment, with my brother behind me and this nightmare in front, instinct took over. I ran straight at it, flashlight raised like a club, that animal sound still pouring from my lungs. The thing's confident posture faltered. The grin slipped. For just a second, I saw something almost human flicker across those distorted features. Surprise, maybe even fear. Then it moved, flowing backward with that horrible liquid grace vanishing into the darkness beyond the truck. We ran. No dignity, no looking back, just pure flight response. We crashed through the door, Miguel Jr. slamming it behind us and dropping the bar into place. I shoved our grandmother's heavy chest against it for good measure, then stood there gasping, shaking, trying to process what we'd just seen. Carlos was on his feet, rifle clutched uselessly in his hands. What happened? What was it? I opened my mouth to answer and found I had no words. How could I describe something that violated every natural law I knew? Miguel Jr. saved me from trying. There's someone out there, he said carefully. Someone. Sick. Wrong. We need to stay inside until morning. It wasn't adequate, but it was something Carlos could grasp. His face went pale, but he nodded, checking the rifle even though we all knew it wasn't loaded. We spent the rest of the night in the main room, backs to the wall, watching the doors and windows. Every sound made us jump. The settling of the house, the pop of wood in the stove, our own breathing. The silence outside was complete, as if the entire desert was holding its breath. Around 3 a.m, something tested the door. Not knocking, pressing, sliding, searching for weakness. The wooden bar creaked but held. We heard breathing through the gaps, wet, labored, wrong. Miguel Jr. gripped a poker from the fireplace. I held a kitchen knife. Carlos had given up on the unloaded rifle and clutched a hammer. The breathing continued for what felt like hours but was probably minutes. Then footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling the house. They paused at each window and we could hear fingers. Too many fingers? Trailing across the glass, testing, probing, looking for a way in. At the back window, the one with the loose frame, the scratching intensified. The glass rattled. A shadow passed across it, tall, distorted, wrong. Carlos whimpered. I bit my lip hard enough to taste blood. Miguel Jr. stepped forward, poker raised, ready to defend our home. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The footsteps retreated. The oppressive presence that had been pressing against the house like a physical weight lifted slightly. We stayed frozen, weapons raised until the first pale light of dawn crept through the windows. Morning arrived like a reluctant friend, bringing visibility but no real comfort. The sunlight seemed thin, watery, unable to fully banish the shadows that clung to corners and crevices. We were exhausted, running on adrenaline fumes and terror, but none of us had slept. Miguel Jr. was the first to venture to a window, peering cautiously through a gap in the curtains. I don't see anything, he reported, but his voice lacked conviction. We needed to check the animals. Ranch life didn't stop for fear, and our parents would never forgive us if we let the sheep suffer because we were too scared to do our jobs. After a long debate, we decided to go out together, armed with whatever we could find. Miguel Jr. with the poker, me with a pitchfork from the storage room, Carlos with his hammer. The morning air was crisp and clean, almost mocking in its normalcy. Birds sang tentatively from the cottonwoods. A light breeze stirred the dust. If not for the evidence scattered around the yard, I might have convinced myself the night had been a shared nightmare. But the evidence was there. Tracks in the dirt, human-shaped but wrong, too long, with what looked like claw marks at the toes. They circled the house multiple times, paused at each entrance, clustered at the loose window. Some of the prints showed a dragging gait. Others suggested impossible leaps. A section of the corral fence was damaged. Thick wooden planks splintered as if something immensely strong had tested them. Dark stains on the ground might have been blood. Several of the sheep showed scratches, parallel marks that looked deliberate rather than accidental. We need to find the dogs, Carlos said quietly. He was right. On a working ranch, dogs weren't pets. They were partners, essential for managing livestock and providing security. Without them, we were vulnerable. We found 3 of them hiding under the tool shed, pressed so far back we had to coax them out with food. Lobo, the one who'd been kicked, limped but seemed otherwise okay. Estrella was nowhere to be found. Neither was Viejo, our oldest and most experienced dog. The three survivors wouldn't leave our sides, tails tucked, constantly looking over their shoulders. Around midday, we spotted 2 sheep missing from the count. They could have wandered off in the chaos, pushed through the damaged fence section. We couldn't afford to lose them. Every animal counted on a small operation like ours. We have to look for them, Miguel Jr. decided, though I could see he hated the idea as much as I did. We'll go together, stay inside of the house, and come back fast. We set off toward the low hills where our sheep typically grazed when they escaped the pen. The path led through scattered Joshua trees and sagebrush, terrain we'd walked 1,000 times but which now felt alien and threatening. Every shadow could hide danger. Every movement in our peripheral vision made us whirl around, weapons raised. The dogs stayed close but refused to range ahead as they normally would. Lobo kept growling low in his throat, the sound never quite stopping. It was nerve-wracking, like having a constant alarm that you couldn't shut off. We found the sheep about a quarter mile from the house, huddled in a small ravine near a dying mesquite tree. They were terrified, bleating pitifully when they saw us. As we approached, trying to calm them enough to herd them back, movement in the shadows caught my eye. It was there, in broad daylight. The thing looked even worse in natural light. Its skin wasn't just pale, it was mottled, showing patches of discoloration like advanced decomposition. Black lines traced across its face and arms, following vein patterns but too dark, too prominent. Its clothes were definitely the remains of normal clothing. I could make out what might have been jeans, a flannel shirt, but they were stained with substances I didn't want to identify. It crouched in the shadow of an overhang, those red-tinged eyes fixed on us. The wide mouth split into that horrible grin, revealing teeth that belonged in a predator's mouth, not a human's. It moved slightly, and I realized it had been feeding on something. The remains were unidentifiable, but the smell of death was unmistakable. Carlos made a sound, half gag, half scream. The thing's attention shifted to him, head tilting with interest. It began to unfold from its crouch, rising to that impossible height, limbs moving with jerky, unnatural motions like a marionette controlled by a drunk puppeteer. Miguel Jr. stepped forward, poker raised. "Get back," he shouted, voice cracking. "Get away from here." The thing laughed. The sound was worse than any scream, wet, bubbling, with undertones that made my teeth ache. It took a step toward us, then another, movements becoming more fluid as if it was remembering how to use its body. I grabbed a rock and threw it, hitting the thing in the shoulder. It barely flinched, but the impact seemed to annoy it. The grin faded. It moved then faster than before, scuttling sideways like a spider. We bunched together, weapons out, trying to track its movement. It circled us once, twice, getting closer each time. The sheep bleated in terror, breaking free from the ravine and bolting toward home. The dogs snarled but wouldn't advance, torn between loyalty and self-preservation. Just when I thought it would attack, it stopped. Stood perfectly still, stared at us with those horrible eyes. Then, without warning, it turned and loped away, disappearing over a rise with speed that nothing that twisted should possess. We didn't wait to see if it would come back. We ran, following the sheep, constantly checking over our shoulders. The house had never looked so welcome, so safe, even though we knew walls and doors hadn't stopped it from trying to enter the night before. By late afternoon, we knew we couldn't stay another night. Whatever that thing was, diseased human, something worse, it was escalating. The daylight encounter proved it was getting bolder. We needed help. Needed to get somewhere with more people, better defenses. Mom and Dad should be back soon, Carlos said hopefully, but even he didn't sound convinced. The harvest dinner sometimes went late, especially if Uncle Jorge broke out his guitar. They might not return until well after dark. We spent the remaining daylight preparing. We brought the surviving dogs inside, along with extra water and the little food we had. Miguel Jr. found our father's hidden box of ammunition and loaded the rifle, though we all knew conventional weapons might not help. We reinforced the windows, moved furniture against weak points, and tried to make the house as secure as possible. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of red and gold, our nerves were stretched to breaking. Every sound made us jump. The dogs paced restlessly, whining at shadows. We took positions at different windows, watching, waiting. Full darkness had just fallen when we heard engines. Multiple vehicles approaching fast. Relief flooded through me so intensely I felt weak. Headlights swept across the yard as 2 trucks and a car pulled up to the house, our parents' vehicle and others from the family gathering. We rushed to unbolt the door, shouting warnings about what was out there. My mother's face went from joy at seeing us to horror as she took in our appearance, the exhaustion, the fear, the weapons clutched in white-knuckled grips. Inside, now, my father commanded, ushering everyone into the house. But as the last person crossed the threshold, I saw it again. Standing at the edge of the headlight beams, tall and twisted and wrong, watching, waiting. My father saw it too. His face went hard. The expression of a man protecting his family. He grabbed a shotgun from his truck, stepped onto the porch. "You need to leave," he said, voice steady despite what he was facing. "This is our land, our home. You're not welcome here." The thing tilted its head, that horrible grin spreading across its face. It took a step forward into the light, and I heard my aunt scream. My father pumped the shotgun, the sound sharp in the night air. For a long moment they faced each other, man and monster, protector and predator. Then the thing laughed again, that wet, bubbling sound, and melted back into the darkness. But we could feel it out there, circling, waiting. My father made the decision quickly. "We're leaving, now, everyone in the vehicles." We didn't argue. We grabbed what we could carry and fled. A convoy racing through the night toward town, toward safety, toward sanity. In the rearview mirror, I watched our house disappear into the darkness, wondering if we'd ever feel safe returning. We stayed with family in town while my father contacted authorities. The sheriff's department searched the property but found only the tracks, the damage, and Estrella's remains near the hills. No sign of the thing itself. They filed reports about a dangerous vagrant, possibly suffering from severe mental illness or disease. A medicine man from the reservation came a week later. He walked the property, performed ceremonies, and told us things about what might drive a human to become something else. Isolation, madness, chemicals from the old mines seeping into groundwater, or darker possibilities he wouldn't name. He cleansed the land as best he could, but warned us that some presences once invited by violence and fear were hard to fully banish. We never moved back to that house. My parents sold the sheep, leased the land to another rancher who only used it during daylight hours. The house stands empty now, slowly being reclaimed by the desert. Sometimes hunters or teenagers report strange sightings in the area. Tall shadows, red eyes in the darkness, the sound of wet laughter carried on the wind. I still dream about that night sometimes. About the moment when I charged at that thing, driven by protective rage. About what might have happened if we'd been alone just one more night. About what kind of sickness or evil could transform a person into something so wrong. But mostly, I remember the lesson that ranch taught me. Sometimes the real horror isn't in what we imagine lurks in the darkness. Sometimes it's in discovering that the darkness can take human form, twist it and send it walking among us with a smile full of too many teeth. We survived. That's what matters. But I'll never again assume that walls and doors are enough to keep out the things that hunt in the desert night. And I'll never forget the sound of that laughter, wet and wrong and far too human for the thing that made it. The first thing you should know about me is that I never planned to become an adventurer. My name is Emily Chen, and until a month ago I was living a perfectly ordinary life as a software engineer in San Francisco. I had a small but comfortable apartment, a steady job at a tech startup, and a rescue cat named Pixel. My idea of excitement was trying a new coffee shop or attending a local tech meetup. Adventure, as far as I was concerned, was best experienced through the pages of a book or the screen of my laptop. But life has a funny way of upending our carefully laid plans. It all started with a phone call from my estranged uncle, Robert Chen. I hadn't spoken to him in years, not since he'd had a falling out with my parents and disappeared into the wilderness of Alaska. The last I'd heard, he was living off the grid in a cabin somewhere near Denali National Park. "Emily," his voice crackled over the line, sounding distant and urgent. "I need your help." "It's about your grandfather's legacy." I frowned, confused. My grandfather had passed away when I was just a child, and as far as I knew, he hadn't left much of a legacy beyond some old photos and a collection of vintage watches. "What are you talking about, Uncle Robert?" I asked, my fingers absently stroking Pixel's fur as she lounged on my lap. "There's no time to explain everything over the phone," he replied, his voice lowering to a near whisper. "You need to come to Alaska as soon as possible. I'll explain everything when you get here." I wanted to argue, to tell him that I couldn't just drop everything and fly to Alaska on a moment's notice. But something in his voice stopped me. It was a mix of urgency and fear. That wasn't like the Uncle Robert I remembered. "All right," I found myself saying, much to my own surprise. "I'll see what I can do." After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence for a few moments, trying to process what had just happened. Pixel meowed softly, sensing my unease. "What have I gotten myself into, Pix?" I murmured, scratching her behind the ears. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. I requested an emergency leave of absence from work, citing a family crisis. My boss, understanding but clearly annoyed, granted me 2 weeks. I arranged for my neighbor to look after Pixel, packed a bag with warm clothes — I'd heard Alaska could be brutally cold even in the summer — and booked a flight to Fairbanks. As the plane took off from San Francisco International Airport, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a huge mistake. What did I know about surviving in the Alaskan wilderness? I was a city girl through and through, more comfortable navigating lines of code than hiking trails. And yet, here I was, flying into the unknown, all because of a cryptic phone call from an uncle I barely knew. The flight to Fairbanks was long and uneventful. I tried to distract myself by reading a book on my Kindle, but my mind kept wandering back to Uncle Robert's words. What did he mean by my grandfather's legacy, and why did he sound so scared? Fairbanks greeted me with a crisp, cool breeze that made me glad I'd packed my warmest jacket. As I collected my luggage, I scanned the crowd for Uncle Robert, but he was nowhere to be seen. Instead, I spotted a grizzled old man holding a sign with my name on it. "You Emily Chen?" he asked as I approached, his voice gruff but not unkind. I nodded, suddenly feeling very small and out of place. "Name's Jim. Your uncle sent me to pick you up," he said, grabbing my suitcase before I could protest. "It's a long drive to where we're headed. Hope you're ready for an adventure, city girl." As we walked to his battered pickup truck, I couldn't help but wonder what I'd gotten myself into. This was so far out of my comfort zone that I might as well have been on another planet, but there was no turning back now. The drive out of Fairbanks was beautiful in a way I'd never experienced before. The landscape was vast and wild, with dense forest giving way to sweeping tundra. Mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks shrouded in mist. It was awe-inspiring and more than a little intimidating. Jim wasn't much for conversation, which suited me fine. I was too busy trying to take in the scenery and calm my growing nerves. After what felt like hours, we turned off the main road onto a bumpy dirt track that wound its way deeper into the wilderness. "Your uncle's place is just up ahead," Jim said, breaking the silence. "Strange man, your uncle. Been living out here for years, barely comes into town. Whatever he's got you mixed up in, be careful." Before I could ask what he meant by that, we rounded a bend and I saw it. Uncle Robert's cabin. It was larger than I'd expected, a 2-story log structure nestled against a backdrop of towering pines. Smoke curled from the chimney and I could see a figure moving behind one of the windows. As Jim pulled up in front of the cabin, the front door swung open and Uncle Robert stepped out onto the porch. He looked older than I remembered. His hair now more gray than black, his face lined and weathered, but his eyes were the same, dark and intense, filled with a mixture of relief and worry. "Emily?" he called out as I climbed out of the truck. "Thank God you're here. We don't have much time." I thanked Jim, who gave me one last concerned look before driving off, leaving me alone with my uncle and a growing sense of unease. "Uncle Robert," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's going on? Why did you call me here?" He glanced around nervously as if expecting to see someone watching us from the trees. "Not out here," he said, ushering me inside. "It's not safe. I'll explain everything, I promise. But first, we need to get you settled in." As I followed him into the cabin, plugging my suitcase behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just stepped into something much bigger and more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. My ordinary life in San Francisco seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by the looming mystery of my grandfather's legacy and the palpable fear in my uncle's eyes. The inside of Uncle Robert's cabin was a curious blend of rustic charm and high-tech equipment. The walls were lined with bookshelves crammed with volumes on a wide range of subjects, from Alaskan wildlife to advanced physics. A large fireplace dominated one wall of the living room, casting a warm glow over the space. But what caught my eye was the array of computers and scientific instruments that occupied a large desk in the corner. "Make yourself comfortable," Uncle Robert said, gesturing to a worn but cozy-looking armchair. "I'll make us some tea." As he busied himself in the small kitchen area, I took the opportunity to look around. My gaze was drawn to a series of maps pinned to one wall, covered in cryptic symbols and notations. Next to them hung a faded photograph of a man I recognized as my grandfather, standing in front of what looked like an ancient stone structure. Uncle Robert returned with 2 steaming mugs of tea. He handed one to me before settling into the chair opposite mine, his face grave. "Emily," he began, his voice low and intense. "What I'm about to tell you is going to sound incredible, impossible even, but I need you to listen with an open mind. Your grandfather, our family, we're part of something much bigger than you can imagine." I sipped my tea, trying to calm my nerves. "What do you mean, Uncle Robert? What does this have to do with Grandpa's legacy?" He took a deep breath. "Your grandfather wasn't just an archaeologist. He was part of a secret society, one that's existed for centuries. They call themselves the Custodians of the Veil." I couldn't help but laugh nervously. "The Custodians of the Veil? Uncle Robert, this sounds like something out of a fantasy novel." His expression remained deadly serious. "I know how it sounds, Emily, but it's real. The veil they speak of isn't a physical thing. It's the barrier between our world and something else. Something ancient and powerful." I set my mug down, my head spinning. "I don't understand. Are you saying Grandpa was involved in some kind of cult?" Uncle Robert shook his head vehemently. "Not a cult. A group dedicated to protecting humanity from forces beyond our understanding. Your grandfather was a guardian, tasked with safeguarding one of the nexus points, places where the veil is thin, where things can slip through." I stood up, pacing the room. This was too much. "Uncle Robert, I'm a software engineer. I deal in logic and code. What you're saying, it doesn't make any sense." "I know, Emily. I didn't believe it at first either. But I've seen things. Things that defy explanation." He reached for a leather-bound journal on the coffee table and handed it to me. "This was your grandfather's. Read it. It will help you understand." With shaking hands, I opened the journal. The pages were filled with my grandfather's neat handwriting, interspersed with diagrams and sketches. As I skimmed through it, I saw references to ancient artifacts, ley lines, and entities with unpronounceable names. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, looking up from the journal. Uncle Robert's face darkened. "Because the veil is weakening. The nexus point your grandfather guarded, it's becoming unstable. And there are those who would exploit this, who would tear down the veil entirely, not understanding the catastrophe it would unleash." I sank back into my chair, my mind reeling. "And you think I can help?" "Uncle Robert, I'm not equipped for this kind of thing." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "You are, Emily, more than you know. The ability to sense the veil, to interact with it. It runs in our family. Your grandfather had it, I have it, and I believe you do too." I shook my head, overwhelmed. "This is insane. You're talking about magic, about monsters. These things don't exist, and don't they?" Uncle Robert stood and walked to his desk. He returned with a small, intricately carved stone box. "Open it," he said, placing it in my hands. Hesitantly, I lifted the lid. Inside was what looked like a simple compass, but instead of cardinal directions, its face was marked with symbols I didn't recognize. As I touched it, the needle began to spin wildly. "That's a veil dial," Uncle Robert explained. "It reacts to the presence of veil energy, and right now it's going crazy because of you." I stared at the spinning needle, a chill running down my spine. Part of me wanted to throw the veil deal across the room, to run out of the cabin and never look back. But another part, a part I barely recognized, was fascinated. "What do you need me to do?" I heard myself asking. Uncle Robert's shoulders sagged with relief. "We need to stabilize the nexus point. Your grandfather left clues. A series of riddles that lead to the artifacts we need. But time is running out. The ones who want to tear down the veil, they're closing in. I took a deep breath, trying to process everything. "Okay," I said finally. "Where do we start?" Uncle Robert smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. "With this," he said, pulling out an old yellowed piece of paper. On it was written a cryptic verse. "Where earth meets sky in eternal dance, seek the stone that gleams like frozen fire. In the shadow of the sleeping giant, the first key awaits the worthy aspirant." "This is the first clue," Uncle Robert explained. "We need to decipher it and find the artifact it points to. Are you ready for this, Emily?" I looked down at the veil deal in my hand, its needle still spinning frantically. Then I thought of my quiet life in San Francisco, of lines of code and predictable routines. Something had called me here, something I didn't understand but couldn't ignore. "I'm ready," I said, surprising myself with the determination in my voice. As night fell over the Alaskan wilderness, Uncle Robert and I bent over maps and ancient texts, trying to unravel the mystery my grandfather had left behind. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the promise of adventure and danger. Little did I know, our quest was about to take us deep into the heart of Alaska's wildest regions, where the line between myth and reality blurred, and where I would discover strengths I never knew I possessed. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the Alaskan sun painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I awoke feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. We had spent most of the night poring over maps and my grandfather's journals trying to decipher the first clue. As I made my way downstairs, the smell of coffee and bacon greeted me. Uncle Robert was in the kitchen looking as if he hadn't slept at all. "Good morning," he said, sliding a plate of breakfast towards me. "Eat up. We've got a long day ahead of us." I sat down at the small kitchen table, my mind still whirling with everything I'd learned. "Did you figure out the riddle?" I asked between bites of scrambled eggs. Uncle Robert nodded, spreading out a topographical map on the table. "I think so. Where earth meets sky in eternal dance. That's got to be referring to the mountains. And the sleeping giant. That's what the local Athabascan people call Denali." I leaned in, studying the map. Denali, formerly known as Mount McKinley, was the highest peak in North America. Its massive form dominated the landscape of central Alaska. "So we're heading to Denali?" I asked, a mixture of excitement and apprehension coursing through me. "Not quite to the mountain itself," Uncle Robert replied. "The clue mentions the shadow of the sleeping giant. I think we're looking for a specific spot in Denali's shadow. There's an area here," he pointed to a spot on the map, "where an unusual geological formation has been reported. Locals call it the frozen flame because of the way the rocks catch the light." I nodded slowly, the pieces falling into place. "The stone that gleams like frozen fire. That has to be it." "Exactly," Uncle Robert said, a hint of pride in his voice. "We'll drive as far as we can, but we'll have to hike the last few miles. It's rugged terrain, Emily. Are you up for it?" I thought about my sedentary lifestyle in San Francisco, my most strenuous activity being the occasional yoga class. But then I thought about the veil deal, about the legacy my grandfather had left behind. "I'll manage," I said with more confidence than I felt. We spent the next hour packing supplies: food, water, first aid kit, camping gear. Uncle Robert also packed some items I'd never seen before. Strange devices that looked like a cross between compasses and Geiger counters, vials of shimmering liquid, and small pouches of what looked like sand but glowed faintly in the dark. "Veil detection equipment," he explained when he caught me looking. "And some protective measures just in case." Just in case of what, I wondered, but didn't ask. By mid-morning we were on the road, Uncle Robert's battered pickup truck eating up the miles. The scenery was breathtaking, vast expanses of tundra, dense forests, and always, in the distance, the looming presence of the mountains. As we drove, Uncle Robert filled me in on more of our family history. He told me about our ancestors who had been part of the custodians of the veil for generations, about the sacrifices they had made to keep the world safe from things beyond human comprehension. "Your grandfather was one of the best," he said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. He had a way of sensing the veil that was almost unheard of. That's why they entrusted him with guarding one of the most important nexus points. "And now that responsibility falls to us," I said quietly, the weight of it all starting to sink in. Uncle Robert nodded gravely. "To you, Emily, I'm getting too old for this. Your grandfather always said the gift would manifest strongly in you. I fell silent, watching the landscape rush by outside the window. The idea that I had some sort of supernatural gift was still hard to swallow. I was Emily Chen, software engineer and cat mom, not some chosen one with mystical powers. As the day wore on, the road became rougher, winding through increasingly wild terrain. Finally, Uncle Robert pulled off onto a barely visible track that led into a dense forest. "This is as far as we can go by car," he said, killing the engine. "We'll have to hike from here." We shouldered our packs, heavy with supplies and mysterious equipment. Uncle Robert took a moment to consult a compass-like device that I assumed was another piece of veil-detecting technology. "The energy's getting stronger," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "We're on the right track." The hike was grueling. The forest floor was uneven, riddled with exposed roots and hidden dips. I stumbled more times than I could count, my muscles protesting with every step. But as we pushed deeper into the wilderness, something strange began to happen. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, a trick of the light filtering through the canopy. But as we continued, I couldn't deny it any longer. The forest around us seemed to be shifting. Colors became more vivid, shadows deeper. Out of the corner of my eye, I could swear I saw shapes moving among the trees, there and gone in an instant. "Uncle Robert," I panted, pausing to catch my breath. "Is it just me, or does something feel off?" He stopped, turning to face me with a mix of concern and excitement in his eyes. "You can feel it, can't you? The veil is thin here. What you're experiencing is the bleed-through of energies from the other side." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool forest air. "Is it dangerous?" "Not inherently," he replied, resuming our trek. "But it means we need to be cautious. The thinner the veil, the easier it is for things to slip through in both directions." As if to emphasize his point, a sound echoed through the forest, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I froze, my heart pounding. What was that?" I whispered. Uncle Robert's face was grim. "Nothing from this world. Come on, we need to keep moving." We picked up our pace, pushing through the underbrush with renewed urgency. The feeling of otherworldliness grew stronger with each step. The trees seemed to twist into impossible shapes, their bark shimmering with an inner light. Flowers bloomed and withered in seconds, their petals scattering on a wind I couldn't feel. Just when I thought I couldn't take another step, the forest suddenly opened up into a small clearing. And there, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, was a sight that took my breath away. Rising from the forest floor was a formation of rocks unlike anything I'd ever seen. They jutted from the ground at impossible angles, their surfaces smooth and faceted like enormous gemstones. As the sunlight hit them, they seemed to ignite from within, glowing with a fierce cold fire. "The frozen flame," Uncle Robert breathed, his voice filled with awe. We approached the formation cautiously. Up close, I could see that the rocks were covered in intricate patterns, swirls and spirals that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. "Now what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Uncle Robert pulled out the veil dial. Its needle was spinning wildly, faster than I'd ever seen it move. "Now," he said, "we find the key." He began to circle the rock formation, his eyes darting between the veil deal and the patterns on the stones. I followed, my fingers tracing the cool, smooth surface of the rocks. As I did, I felt a strange tingling in my fingertips, as if the stone was vibrating at a frequency just beyond my perception. Suddenly, my hand brushed over a section of rock that felt different, warmer, almost alive. I paused, pressing my palm flat against it. "Uncle Robert," I called out. "I think I found something." He hurried over, his eyes widening as he saw where my hand was. "Emily," he said softly, "look at the stone." I glanced down and gasped. Where my hand touched the rock, the patterns were shifting, realigning themselves into a new configuration. As we watched, a seam appeared in the seemingly solid stone, widening to reveal a small cavity. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like starlight, was a small, intricately carved piece of obsidian. It was no larger than a playing card, but as Uncle Robert carefully lifted it out, I could feel the power radiating from it. "The first key," he said, his voice filled with reverence. "You did it, Emily. You found it." Before I could respond, that otherworldly growl echoed through the clearing again, closer this time. Much closer. Uncle Robert's face paled. "We need to leave," he said urgently, carefully wrapping the obsidian key in a piece of cloth and tucking it into his pack. "Now." As we turned to flee, I caught a glimpse of something moving at the edge of the clearing. It was like a tear in the fabric of reality, a shimmering rift through which I could see something. Something with too many eyes and limbs that bent in ways that made my mind recoil. "Run!" Uncle Robert shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me back towards the forest. We crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces as we ran. Behind us, I could hear the sound of pursuit, a slithering, scraping noise that sent waves of primal fear through my body. As we ran, Uncle Robert fumbled in his pack, pulling out one of the pouches of glowing sand I'd seen earlier. "When I say now," he panted, "I need you to think about safety, about protection. Can you do that?" I nodded, too out of breath to speak. We burst out of the tree line onto the rough track where we'd left the truck. The sun had set, leaving us in the eerie twilight of the Alaskan summer night. "Now," Uncle Robert shouted, skidding to a stop and turning to face the forest. I closed my eyes, concentrating with all my might on the idea of safety, of a barrier between us and whatever was chasing us. I felt a surge of something course through me like an electric current, but somehow more. Uncle Robert flung the pouch of sand into the air. Instead of falling to the ground, it hung suspended, forming a shimmering curtain between us and the forest. Just in time, a dark, writhing mass slammed into the barrier, letting out a shriek that made my bones vibrate. "Go, go!" Uncle Robert yelled, pushing me towards the truck. We scrambled in, and Uncle Robert gunned the engine, tires spinning in the dirt before finding purchase. As we sped away, I looked in the side mirror. The shimmering barrier was fading, and through it, I could see shapes. Impossible shapes that hurt my eyes to look at, moving in ways that defied physics. I turned away, my heart pounding, as Uncle Robert drove us back towards civilization. We had the key, but at what cost? And what new dangers had we unleashed? As the adrenaline began to fade, I realized that my life had irrevocably changed. There was no going back to my quiet existence in San Francisco, not now that I'd seen what lurked beyond the veil. Whether I liked it or not, I was part of this now, part of an ancient legacy, a cosmic struggle between light and dark. And somewhere out there, 2 more keys were waiting to be found. The drive back to Uncle Robert's cabin was tense and silent. My mind was reeling, trying to process everything that had happened. The frozen flame, the key, the thing that had chased us. It all felt like a dream or a nightmare. As we pulled up to the cabin, I noticed something was off. The door was slightly ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. "Uncle Robert," I said, my voice tight with fear. "Did you leave the door open when we left?" His face hardened. "No," he said grimly, reaching under his seat and pulling out what looked like an antique revolver. "Stay in the car. If anything happens, drive. There's a safe house marked on the map in the glove compartment." Before I could protest, he was out of the truck, moving cautiously towards the cabin. I watched, my heart in my throat, as he disappeared inside. Seconds stretched into minutes, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, after what seemed like hours, Uncle Robert reappeared in the doorway, his face pale. "It's clear," he called out. "But you need to see this." Hesitantly, I got out of the truck and made my way to the cabin. As soon as I stepped inside, I could see why Uncle Robert looked so shaken. The place had been ransacked. Books were strewn across the floor, furniture overturned, and worst of all, Uncle Robert's desk had been completely destroyed, the computer smashed beyond repair. "They were looking for something," Uncle Robert said, carefully picking his way through the debris. "The key, most likely, or information about it." "Who?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew the answer. "The Shroud," he replied, his voice grim. "A group dedicated to tearing down the veil. They believe that by doing so they'll gain unimaginable power. They don't understand or don't care about the catastrophe it would unleash." I shivered, remembering the glimpse I'd caught of what lay beyond the veil. The idea of such things roaming freely in our world was terrifying. "What do we do now?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. Uncle Robert was silent for a moment, his eyes scanning the wreckage of his home. Then, with a determined set to his jaw, he turned to me. We continue. We find the other 2 keys before the shroud does. It's more important now than ever. He moved to a section of wall that looked no different from any other, and pressed his hand against it. To my amazement, a hidden panel slid open, revealing a small safe. Uncle Robert quickly entered a combination and pulled out a thick envelope. Emergency funds and documents, he explained. And this. He held up a small leather-bound book. It looked ancient, its pages yellowed and fragile. Your grandfather's field journal, Uncle Robert said, handling the book with reverence. It contains information about all 3 keys, including the riddles that lead to them. I kept it hidden here separate from his other journals. Thank God the shroud didn't find it. He handed me the journal, and as my fingers touched the worn leather, I felt a strange sensation, like a jolt of static electricity, but warmer, more alive. The feeling lingered, spreading up my arm and through my body. Uncle Robert watched me closely. You can feel it, can't you? The connection to your grandfather, to the legacy he left behind. I nodded, unable to find words to describe the sensation. As I carefully opened the journal, my eyes fell on a passage written in my grandfather's neat handwriting. The keys are more than mere objects. They are conduits, bridges between worlds. In the right hands, they can mend the weakening veil. In the wrong hands, they could tear it asunder. The burden of their guardianship is heavy, but it is one our family must bear. I looked up at Uncle Robert, the weight of responsibility settling over me like a physical thing. What's our next move? He smiled grimly. We decipher the next riddle and we find the second key. But not here. The shroud knows about this place now. We need to go somewhere safe, somewhere they won't think to look for us. As Uncle Robert began to pack what essentials he could salvage, I flipped through the journal, my eyes catching on another cryptic verse. In the land where ice never melts, where aurora paints the endless night, seek the cavern of whispered secrets, where the second key gleams in twilight's light. I read it aloud to Uncle Robert, watching as his brow furrowed in concentration. The land where ice never melts, he mused. That could be referring to one of the glaciers up north. And the aurora will need to go even further north, possibly into the Arctic Circle. The idea of venturing into such remote, harsh terrain was daunting, but I pushed my fear aside. We had no choice. The fate of the world, quite literally, depended on us finding these keys before the shroud did. As we loaded the truck with what supplies we could gather, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned, half expecting to see another otherworldly horror, but instead I saw a fox. It stood at the edge of the clearing, its rust-red fur a stark contrast to the green of the forest. But there was something odd about it. Its eyes seemed to glow with an inner light, and as it looked at me, I felt a strange sense of recognition. Uncle Robert, I called out softly. Look. He turned, his eyes widening as he saw the fox. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered. Looks like we've got a guide. A guide? I asked, confused. Uncle Robert nodded. Sometimes when the veil is thin, animals can be influenced by the other side. They become messengers, guides. Your grandfather used to talk about them. Said they always showed up when he needed them most. As if in response to Uncle Robert's words, the fox turned and began to trot down the road, pausing to look back at us expectantly. I guess that's our cue, I said, climbing into the truck. As we pulled away from the cabin, following the fox down the winding road, I couldn't help but feel a mix of fear and excitement. We were heading into the unknown, chasing ancient secrets and fleeing from dangers I barely understood. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The fox led us to a small airstrip where a bush plane was waiting, its pilot giving us a knowing nod as we approached. It seemed Uncle Robert had more allies than I'd realized. As we took off, soaring over the vast Alaskan wilderness, I watched the fox grow smaller and smaller until it disappeared into the forest. Ahead of us lay the Arctic with its secrets and dangers. The second key was out there waiting to be found. And so our journey continued, deeper into a world of magic and mystery that I was only beginning to understand. Little did I know, the greatest challenges and the greatest revelations were yet to come. The bush plane touched down on a makeshift airstrip near the edge of the Arctic Circle, the frozen tundra stretching out in all directions as far as the eye could see. Despite the constant daylight of the Arctic summer, there was a chill in the air that seeped into my bones. As we unloaded our gear from the plane, I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the stark beauty of the landscape. The vast emptiness was both breathtaking and intimidating. "Welcome to the top of the world," Uncle Robert said, shouldering his pack. "The glacier we're looking for is about a day's hike from here. We should get moving." We set off across the tundra, the spongy ground making each step a challenge. Uncle Robert led the way, occasionally consulting his compass and the strange veil-detecting devices he carried. I followed, my mind racing with questions. "Uncle Robert," I said, panting slightly from the exertion, "you said the shroud wants to tear down the veil. But what exactly would that mean? What would happen?" He was silent for a long moment, his face grim. "Chaos," he finally said. "Pure, unimaginable chaos. The veil doesn't just keep things out, Emily. It maintains the very fabric of our reality. If it were to fall completely, well, the laws of physics as we know them would cease to apply. Time and space would warp and twist. And the entities that exist beyond the veil, things our minds can barely comprehend, they would pour into our world." I shuddered, remembering the glimpse I'd caught of the thing that had chased us in the forest. The idea of such creatures roaming freely was terrifying. But why would anyone want that? I asked. "Power," Uncle Robert replied. "The shroud believes that in the chaos of a broken veil, they can harness energies beyond human comprehension. They think they'll become gods, but they're fools. No human mind could withstand such power. They'd destroy themselves and the world along with them." We walked in silence for a while, the weight of his words settling over us like a heavy blanket. The landscape seemed to stretch on forever, a sea of hardy tundra plants and scattered rocks. In the distance, I could see the looming shape of a glacier, its blue-white surface glinting in the never-setting sun. As we approached the glacier, the air grew colder, and a mist began to form around us. It swirled and eddied in strange patterns, sometimes taking shapes that seemed almost deliberate before dissolving again. "The veil is thin here," Uncle Robert murmured, his eyes darting around warily. "Stay close, and whatever you do, don't wander off." We began to climb the glacier, our crampons biting into the ice with each step. The mist grew thicker, and soon I could barely see a few feet in front of me. The only sound was our labored breathing and the crunch of ice under our feet. Suddenly, Uncle Robert stopped. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I strained my ears, and then I heard it, a faint whisper like voices carried on the wind. But there was something off about it, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "The cavern of whispered secrets," I breathed, remembering the riddle. Uncle Robert nodded grimly. "It's close, but be careful. In places like this where the veil is thin, things aren't always what they seem." We pressed on, following the whispers. As we rounded a bend in the glacier, the mist suddenly cleared, revealing a sight that took my breath away. Before us was an enormous ice cave, its entrance a gaping maw in the side of the glacier. The ice here was different. It seemed to shimmer and shift, patterns and colors swirling just below the surface. "This is it," Uncle Robert said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "The cavern of whispered secrets." As we approached the entrance, the whispers grew louder. I could almost make out words now, but they were in a language I didn't understand. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. We stepped into the cave, the ice beneath our feet glowing with an inner light. The walls were smooth and curved, like the inside of a massive geode, and everywhere there were reflections, but not of us. I saw glimpses of other places, other times, scenes that couldn't possibly exist in our world. "Don't look too closely," Uncle Robert warned. "Those are reflections of other realities. Stare too long and you might lose yourself." We made our way deeper into the cave, the whispers growing louder with each step. The air was thick with energy, making it hard to breathe. My skin tingled, and I could feel my hair standing on end. Finally, we reached what seemed to be the heart of the cave. Here the ice formed a perfect circle, smooth as glass. In the center, hovering a few inches above the surface, was a small object. It looked like a piece of crystal, but it pulsed with an inner light, casting rainbow reflections across the ice. "The second key," Uncle Robert breathed. I stepped forward, drawn to the key as if by an invisible force. As I reached out to take it, the whispers suddenly crescendoed into a deafening roar. The ice beneath my feet began to crack. "Emily, wait!" Uncle Robert shouted, but it was too late. As my fingers closed around the key, the world exploded into light and sound. I felt myself falling, tumbling through space and time. Images flashed before my eyes. Past, present, future, realities that never were and never would be. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. I found myself standing back in the cave, the key clutched tightly in my hand. But something was wrong. The cave was silent now, the whispers gone. And Uncle Robert. I looked around frantically, but he was nowhere to be seen. "Uncle Robert!" I called out, my voice echoing in the eerie silence. There was no response. I was alone in the cavern, holding a key to reality itself with no idea how to get back or what to do next. As panic began to set in, I felt a warmth emanating from the key in my hand. I looked down and saw that it was glowing brightly, pulsing in a rhythm that felt strangely familiar. It was almost like a heartbeat. Instinctively, I closed my eyes and focused on the pulse of the key. As I did, I felt that same strange energy I'd experienced before. The power that had helped me find the first key, that had fueled the protective barrier against the creature in the forest. When I opened my eyes, I gasped. The cave around me had changed. The ice was no longer smooth and reflective. Instead, it was covered in intricate patterns and symbols, glowing with the same inner light as the key. I realized with a start that I could read these symbols. They weren't in any language I knew, and yet their meaning was clear to me. They told a story, the story of the veil, of the keys, of the delicate balance between realities. And there, hidden within the story, was a message from my grandfather. "To the one who holds the key," I read aloud, my voice shaking. "The path is not easy, but you are not alone. Trust in yourself, in the power that flows through our bloodline. The veil responds to your will. Shape it, guide it, protect it. The third key lies where the forgotten dreams sleep, in the city beneath the waves. Find it and restore the balance. The fate of all realities rests in your hands." As I finished reading, the symbols faded, leaving the ice smooth and unremarkable once more. But the key in my hand pulsed warmly as if in acknowledgement. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I didn't fully understand what had happened or what it all meant, but I knew one thing for certain. I had to find the third key. Uncle Robert was out there somewhere, and the shroud was still a threat. The fate of the world, of all worlds, depended on me. With newfound determination, I made my way out of the cave. The Arctic landscape stretched before me, vast and unforgiving. But for the first time since this journey began, I felt a sense of purpose, of destiny. As I stepped out onto the glacier, I saw movement in the distance. For a moment, I tensed, fearing it might be the shroud. But as the figure drew closer, I realized it was the same fox we had seen before, its fur gleaming like fire against the ice. It looked at me with those eerily intelligent eyes, then turned and began to trot across the glacier. I smiled despite everything. It seemed my guide had found me once again. "All right," I said to myself, clutching the key tightly. "Let's go find a city beneath the waves." And with that, I set off across the ice, following the fox into the unknown. The third key was waiting, and with it, the power to save not just our world, but all realities. My ordinary life as a software engineer in San Francisco felt like a distant dream now. I was Emily Chen, heir to an ancient legacy, protector of the veil, and my journey was far from over. The journey from the Arctic to the coast of Greece was a blur of long flights, tense layovers, and constant vigilance. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential shroud agent, every stranger a possible threat. The 2 keys we had collected so far were a constant presence, their energy a low hum at the edge of my consciousness. I had spent the journey poring over my grandfather's journal, trying to decipher the clues about the third key. The city beneath the waves had immediately made me think of Atlantis, the legendary sunken city. But surely it couldn't be that simple, could it? As our small chartered boat cut through the waters of the Aegean Sea, I couldn't help but marvel at how much my life had changed in just a few short weeks. The Emily Chen who had boarded a plane to Alaska, worried about deadlines and debugging code, felt like a different person entirely. "We're getting close," the captain called out. his voice carrying over the sound of the waves and the engine. "You sure this is where you want to be? There's nothing out here but open water." I exchanged a glance with Dr. Ilara Winters, the marine archaeologist we had recruited to help us. She had been skeptical at first, but after seeing the keys and experiencing some of the strange phenomena that seemed to follow them, she had become a believer. "This is the place," I said with more confidence than I felt. "Trust me." As if in response to my words, the key in my pocket began to pulse with warmth. I pulled it out, gasping as I saw it was glowing brightly, its light piercing even the bright Mediterranean sun. Suddenly, the sea around us began to churn. The captain swore loudly in Greek, fighting with the wheel as waves rocked the boat. And then, to our amazement, the water in front of us began to part, revealing a shimmering, translucent dome beneath the waves. "Impossible," Dr. Winters breathed, her eyes wide with wonder, but I knew better. After everything I'd seen, impossible was just another Tuesday. "Take us in," I told the captain, who looked at me like I was insane but complied nonetheless. As we passed through the dome, the world around us shifted. The bright blue of the Mediterranean was replaced by an eerie greenish light, and there, spreading out before us in all its impossible glory, was a city. Spires of crystal and opalescent stone reached towards a non-existent sky. Streets paved with what looked like mother-of-pearl wound between buildings that defied earthly architecture. And everywhere there was life. Plants that couldn't exist under the sea, strange creatures that looked like a mix of fish and mammals, and... "Are those... people?" Dr. Winters gasped, pointing at figures moving about the city. They looked human, but there was something off about them. Their skin had a faint blue tinge, and I could see gills pulsing on their necks. "The inhabitants of Atlantis," I murmured, the knowledge coming to me from somewhere deep inside, a part of me that was connected to this place. They didn't die when the city sank. They adapted. As our boat docked at what appeared to be a marina, a group of these Atlanteans approached. They moved with an otherworldly grace, their eyes large and dark, regarding us with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. One of them stepped forward, a tall figure adorned with intricate jewelry that seemed to be made of living coral. When he spoke, his voice was melodious with an accent I couldn't place. "Welcome, Keeper of the Keys," he said, his gaze fixed on me. "We have awaited your arrival for many long years." I stepped off the boat on shaky legs, still trying to process everything I was seeing. "You know who I am?" I asked. The Atlantean nodded solemnly. "We have kept watch over the third key since the days of your ancestor, Elias Chen. He entrusted it to us, knowing that one day, when the veil grew thin and the balance was threatened, his descendant would come to claim it." I felt a swell of emotion at the mention of my grandfather. Even now, years after his passing, he was still guiding me, still protecting the world. "Please," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I need the key. The veil is weakening, and there are those who would tear it down completely." The Atlantean's face grew grave. "We know of the danger. The echoes of discord have reached even our secluded realm. Come, Keeper. The key awaits, but claiming it will not be easy. You must prove yourself worthy as your ancestor did before you." As we followed the Atlanteans into the heart of their impossible city, I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and trepidation. What trials awaited me? And more importantly, would I be able to overcome them? The fate of not just our world, but all realities hung in the balance. And as the distant sound of something large moving through the waters reached my ears, I realized that our arrival hadn't gone unnoticed. The shroud was coming and time was running out. The race for the final key was on, and the true test of my newfound powers was about to begin. Little did I know the greatest challenge wouldn't be claiming the key, but confronting the truth about my family's legacy and my own destiny. As we delved deeper into the heart of Atlantis, I steeled myself for whatever lay ahead. I was Emily Chen, Keeper of the Keys, protector of the veil, and I was ready to face my destiny. The Atlantean city was a maze of crystalline corridors and chambers that seemed to shift and change as we passed through them. Our guide, who had introduced himself as Naren, led us to a vast circular room dominated by a pool of water so still, it looked like a mirror. "This is the Chamber of Reflections," Naren explained, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "It is here that you will face the trial of tides." I swallowed hard, trying to quell the nervousness rising in my chest. What exactly does this trial entail? Naren's large dark eyes regarded me solemnly. The trial is different for each keeper. It will challenge not just your physical abilities, but your mind, your heart, and your very understanding of reality. Are you prepared to begin? I glanced at Dr. Winters, who gave me an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, I turned back to Naren. I'm ready. As soon as the words left my mouth, the room began to change. The walls seemed to melt away, replaced by an endless expanse of ocean. The floor beneath my feet became transparent, giving the illusion that I was standing on the surface of the water. Naren and Dr. Winters had vanished. I was alone in this strange liminal space suspended between sea and sky. Suddenly, the water beneath me began to swirl, forming images. I saw flashes of the past, my grandfather on his expeditions, the founding of the custodians of the Veil, ancient battles against forces that defied description. The history of my family's legacy played out beneath my feet like a living tapestry. Then the images shifted, showing me visions of possible futures. I saw worlds where the veil had fallen, realities twisted beyond recognition, horrors unleashed upon an unsuspecting earth. But I also saw hope, worlds preserved, balance maintained, the veil strong and intact. A voice echoed around me, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Keeper of the keys, you stand at a crossroads of realities. The choices you make will ripple across time and space. Are you prepared to bear this burden? I am, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. The water beneath me surged upward, enveloping me in a cocoon of liquid. But strangely, I found I could breathe. As I floated in this womb-like space, I felt a presence, ancient, powerful, and undeniably alive. Emily Chen, the presence spoke directly into my mind. You have come far, but your greatest test lies ahead. To claim the final key, you must understand the true nature of the veil and your role as its keeper. Suddenly, I was no longer in my body. My consciousness expanded, spreading out across realities. I saw the veil for what it truly was. Not a simple barrier, but a complex living network that connected and separated countless realities. It was beautiful and terrifying, a cosmic tapestry of unimaginable complexity. And I saw my place within it. The keepers weren't just guardians. They were part of the veil itself. Our bloodline was woven into its very fabric, our lives and choices reverberating across realities. The enormity of it threatened to overwhelm me. How could one person bear such responsibility? How could I possibly be worthy of this? You are not alone, the presence reassured me. Every keeper before you has faced this moment of doubt. But you have a strength within you, Emily. A strength born of compassion, of determination, of the very human desire to protect and nurture. That is why you were chosen. Images flashed through my mind. My life in San Francisco, my journey to Alaska, the challenges I'd faced and overcome. I saw myself through the eyes of others, Uncle Robert's pride, Dr. Winters' admiration, even the respect of the Atlanteans. I saw myself through the eyes of others, Uncle Robert's pride, Dr. Winters' admiration, even the respect of the Atlanteans. I saw the strength I possessed not despite my ordinary life, but because of it. My analytical mind, my perseverance, my ability to adapt, all skills I'd honed as a software engineer, now serving me in this greater purpose. You are ready, the presence declared. Claim your birthright, keeper of the keys. The water around me began to swirl faster and faster until it formed a vortex. At its heart, I saw a glimmer of light. Instinctively, I reached out, my fingers closing around something solid. In a rush, I found myself back in the chamber of reflections, gasping for air. In my hand was the third key, a small, iridescent object that seemed to shift between liquid and solid as I watched. Naren and Dr. Winters were there, looking at me with a mixture of awe and concern. You did it, Dr. Winters breathed. Emily, are you all right? I nodded, still trying to process everything I'd experienced. I understand now, I said, my voice hoarse. I know what we have to do. Before I could explain further, an alarm echoed through the chamber. Naren's face paled. The city's defenses have been breached, he said urgently. The shroud has found us. My heart raced, but I felt a strange calm settle over me. I knew what I had to do. Take us to the highest point in the city, I told Naren, quickly. As we raced through the crystalline corridors, I could hear the sounds of battle echoing through the city. The Shroud had brought an army, and the Atlanteans were fighting back with weapons that looked like a fusion of technology and magic. We emerged onto a balcony at the top of the tallest spire. From here I could see the entire city, and the dark shapes of Shroud vessels penetrating the dome that protected Atlantis from the ocean above. "Emily, what are you going to do?" Dr. Winters asked, her voice tight with fear. I smiled, feeling the power of the 3 keys thrumming through me. "What I was born to do," I replied. "I'm going to mend the veil." I held out the 3 keys, feeling their energies intertwine. As if responding to my will, they began to glow, brighter and brighter until they were like 3 miniature suns. I closed my eyes, reaching out with my mind to the veil itself. I could feel it now, a vast living network that spanned realities, and I could feel the weak spots, the places where it had begun to fray. Channeling the power of the keys, I began to weave. It was like writing the most complex code of my life, but instead of a computer language, I was programming reality itself. I mended the weak spots, reinforced the boundaries between worlds, all while maintaining the delicate connections that allowed the multiverse to function. I was vaguely aware of the battle raging around me, of Dr. Winters and Naren protecting me from Shroud agents who had made it this far, but my focus remained on my task. As I worked, I felt other presences joining me, the spirits of past keepers, lending me their strength and knowledge. My grandfather was there, his familiar presence a comfort as I faced this monumental task. With a final surge of effort, I completed the weaving. The veil snapped back into place, stronger than ever. A shockwave of energy burst from me, washing over the city and beyond. I opened my eyes to see the Shroud vessels disintegrating, their occupants crying out as they were banished back to their own reality. The dome over Atlantis shimmered, reinforced by the power of the mended veil. As the last echoes of battle faded, I turned to Dr. Winters and Naren, a tired smile on my face. "It's done," I said simply. In the days that followed, as we helped the Atlanteans rebuild and said our goodbyes, I had time to reflect on my journey. I was no longer the same Emily Chen who had left San Francisco just a few weeks ago. I was the keeper of the keys, the guardian of the veil, protector of realities. But I was also still me, a software engineer who enjoyed a good cup of coffee and scratching her cat behind the ears. And I realized that was the point. The strength to bear this responsibility came not from some mystical power, but from my very humanity. As our boat cut through the waves, leaving the hidden city of Atlantis behind, I looked out at the horizon. The world seemed bigger now, filled with more wonder and mystery than I'd ever imagined, and I was ready to face whatever came next. Uncle Robert was waiting for us at the dock, having found his way back after our separation in the Arctic. As I hugged him tightly, I felt a sense of completion. My family, my legacy, my destiny, all had led me to this moment. "What now?" Dr. Winters asked as we drove away from the coast. I smiled, feeling the comforting weight of the keys in my pocket. "Now we keep watch. We protect. We live." I remember my mom used to say that life is a series of calculated risks, and I always thought she was right. I'm Brett McAllister, a guy who has spent most of his life calculating those risks. A mechanical engineer by trade, I've always believed in the reliability of numbers and the precision of machines. But numbers and machines couldn't prepare me for what I encountered in the Oregon wilderness. Growing up in Portland, I was never far from nature. The Pacific Northwest, with its lush forests and rugged coastlines, had always been my playground. Weekends were often spent hiking trails, fishing in crystal-clear streams, or simply sitting by a campfire, watching the stars emerge in the night sky. There was something about the wilderness that spoke to me, a primal call that resonated deep within my soul. As I grew older and my career took off, those wilderness excursions became less frequent. The demands of my job at a prestigious engineering firm in downtown Portland left little time for extended camping trips. But the yearning never faded. It was always there, a persistent ache in my chest, a longing for the simplicity and raw beauty of nature. That's why, when I finally managed to secure a few days off work, there was no question about how I'd spend them. I dusted off my old RV, a 1985 Winnebago that had seen better days but still ran like a charm, thanks to my meticulous maintenance. I stocked up on supplies, checked and double-checked my gear, and set my sights on the Tillamook State Forest. The Tillamook State Forest had always held a mystique for me. Located just 40 miles west of Portland, it was a vast expanse of nearly 364,000 acres of forest, stretching across the northern Oregon Coast Range. I'd heard tales of its beauty, of hidden waterfalls and secluded campsites, of trails that wound through ancient groves of Douglas firs and western hemlocks. It was a place I'd always meant to explore but had never found the time. As I pulled out of my driveway early on a crisp September morning, I felt a sense of excitement I hadn't experienced in years. The city streets were quiet, the first rays of sunlight just beginning to peek over the horizon. I navigated through the sleepy suburbs, the RV humming steadily beneath me, until I hit Highway 6 heading west. The drive was nothing short of spectacular. As I left the city behind, the landscape transformed. Rolling hills gave way to steeper terrain, the road winding its way through dense forests. Shafts of golden sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating a dappled pattern on the asphalt. The air grew crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. I rolled down the windows, letting the cool mountain air flood the RV. The radio crackled with static before settling on a local station playing classic rock. As the familiar strains of Hotel California filled the air, I couldn't help but smile. It felt like a good omen, a sign that this trip was exactly what I needed. About 2 hours into the drive, I turned off the main highway onto a smaller, more rugged road. The pavement gave way to gravel, and the forest seemed to close in around me. The trees here were massive, their trunks wider than my RV, their branches forming a thick canopy overhead that blocked out much of the sky. I drove slowly, carefully navigating the winding road. The RV creaked and groaned as it tackled the uneven terrain, but it held steady. I'd always trusted this old girl, and she'd never let me down before. As I delved deeper into the forest, the sense of isolation grew. I hadn't passed another vehicle in over an hour, and the only sounds were the crunch of gravel under my tires and the occasional call of a bird high in the treetops. It was exactly what I'd been looking for, a complete escape from the noise and chaos of city life. After another hour of careful driving, I spotted what I was looking for. A small turnoff that led to a clearing just visible through the trees. It was perfect, tucked away from the main road and surrounded by towering firs. I carefully maneuvered the RV off the road and into the clearing, feeling a sense of satisfaction as I finally cut the engine. For a moment, I just sat there, letting the silence wash over me. It was a profound quiet, broken only by the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze and the occasional chirp of a bird. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension of the past few months begin to melt away. As I stepped out of the RV, the forest seemed to embrace me. The air was cool and damp, filled with the earthy scent of moss and decaying leaves. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating patches of warmth on the forest floor. I stretched, feeling my muscles protest after the long drive, and took in my surroundings. The clearing was small but perfect for my needs. There was enough space for the RV and a campfire, with room left over for my camping chair and a small table. The ground was carpeted with a thick layer of pine needles soft underfoot. At the edge of the clearing, a small game trail disappeared into the underbrush, promising exploration opportunities. I spent the next hour setting up camp, falling easily into the familiar routine. I leveled the RV, set up my camping chair, and gathered wood for a fire. As I worked, I felt the last vestiges of stress from my city life melt away. Here, in the heart of the forest, deadlines and project specs seemed a world away. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, I decided to take a short hike before dinner. I grabbed my backpack, made sure I had water and a few snacks, and set off down the game trail. The forest was alive with the sounds of evening, birds calling to each other, small animals rustling in the underbrush, the distant sound of water trickling over rocks. The trail wound its way through the trees, sometimes so faint I could barely make it out, but I wasn't worried about getting lost. I'd always had a good sense of direction, and I made sure to note landmarks as I went. A lightning-struck tree here, an unusually shaped boulder there. After about an hour of hiking, I came across a small stream. The water was crystal clear, bubbling over smooth river rocks. I sat on a fallen log, pulled out a granola bar, and just listened to the sound of the water. As I sat there, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. This was why I loved the wilderness. This sense of connection to something greater than myself. This reminder of the raw beauty of the natural world. As the light began to fade, I made my way back to camp. The hike back seemed shorter, and before long I could see the clearing through the trees. The sight of my RV, a little piece of civilization in the midst of the wilderness, brought a smile to my face. I got a fire going as night fell, the flames casting a warm glow over the clearing. The crackling of the fire mixed with the night sounds of the forest, the hoot of an owl, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. I cooked a simple dinner of hot dogs roasted over the fire, washing it down with a cold beer from the RV's fridge. As I sat there, watching the flames dance and listening to the forest around me, I felt more at peace than I had in years. The worries and stresses of my everyday life seemed far away, insignificant in the face of this ancient forest. I thought about what my mom used to say about life being a series of calculated risks, and I realized that sometimes the best things in life come from taking a chance, from stepping out of your comfort zone and into the unknown. Little did I know, as I sat there basking in the warmth of the fire and the serenity of the forest, that my beliefs about calculated risks and the unknown were about to be tested in ways I could never have imagined. The peace of that evening was the calm before a storm that would shake the very foundations of my understanding of the world. As the night deepened, the noises of the forest became more pronounced. The chirping of crickets created a constant background hum, punctuated by the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant call of a coyote. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting a soft flickering light across the clearing. I leaned back in my chair, nursing my second beer of the evening, and gazed up at the sky. Away from the light pollution of the city, the stars were breathtaking. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a river of light, and I found myself picking out constellations I hadn't seen since I was a kid camping with my dad. It was in this moment of quiet contemplation that I first heard it, a sound that didn't belong, a discordant note in the symphony of the forest. At first, it was so faint I thought I might have imagined it. A low rumbling noise like the growl of an engine, but deeper, more primal. I sat up straighter, straining my ears. For a long moment there was nothing but the normal sounds of the night. Then I heard it again, closer this time. It was followed by a series of thuds like something heavy moving through the underbrush. My heart rate picked up and I felt a prickle of unease run down my spine. I stood up, my eyes scanning the darkness beyond the dying firelight. My mind raced through the possibilities. A bear, maybe? Or a cougar? I'd seen the warning signs at the park entrance about local wildlife. But this didn't feel right. I've been around enough animals to know what they sound like, and this was different. There was an intelligence to it, a deliberateness that sent a shiver down my spine. I debated with myself for a moment, then decided to investigate. I grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight from the RV and swept the beam across the edge of the clearing. The trees cast long, flickering shadows, but nothing seemed out of place. The forest looked as it had all day, dense, dark, and impenetrable beyond the first few rows of trees. The sound came again, louder, more insistent. It seemed to be coming from my left, deeper in the forest. I swung the flashlight in that direction, my heart pounding in my chest. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating tree trunks and underbrush, but revealing nothing unusual. I took a few steps towards the tree line, my feet crunching on the carpet of pine needles. The night suddenly felt oppressive, the darkness beyond my flashlight beam seeming to press in around me. I could feel sweat beading on my forehead despite the cool night air. That's when I saw it, a flash of movement just at the edge of the flashlight's beam. Something large, moving with surprising speed between the trees. I caught a glimpse of matted fur, a hulking shape that seemed too big to be real. My breath caught in my throat. Whatever this thing was, it was no ordinary forest animal. It was massive, far larger than any bear or cougar I'd ever heard of. And it moved with a purpose, an intelligence that made my blood run cold. I knew I should retreat, get back to the safety of the RV, and wait out the night. But something kept me rooted to the spot. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe stupidity, or maybe something deeper, a need to confront whatever was out there to understand it. The forest had gone eerily quiet. Even the crickets had fallen silent. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart in my ears. I swept the flashlight back and forth, searching for another glimpse of the creature. Suddenly, there was a tremendous crash of breaking branches, followed by a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the trees. The sound wasn't human, at least not entirely. It had a sharp, almost metallic edge to it, like the grinding of gears. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight in my shock. My finger tightened on the switch and the beam swung wildly across the forest, and that's when I saw it clearly for the first time. The creature burst from between two massive firs, moving with impossible speed for something so large. My breath caught in my throat as the light fell fully on it. It was covered in thick, matted fur, dark and bristling like the quills of a porcupine, but it wasn't the fur that froze me in place. It was the size. This thing was enormous, easily over 8 feet tall, with a hulking, muscular frame that rippled with every movement. Its limbs were long and powerful, ending in claws that looked like they could tear through steel. And then I saw its face, or at least what I thought was its face. It had a grotesque, twisted snout that resembled a wild boar's, with tusks jutting out on either side like jagged knives. But the worst part was its mouth. It was wide, almost impossibly wide, lined with rows of teeth that seemed to glint in the flashlight's beam. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I felt a primal fear unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Its eyes were not the eyes of an animal. There was an intelligence there, a malevolence that chilled me to my core. For a split second, neither of us moved. We were frozen in a tableau of terror. Me, a fragile human armed with nothing but a flashlight, and this thing, this impossible creature that shouldn't exist in any sane world. Then, with a roar that shook the very air around us, it charged. I did the only thing I could. I ran. I dropped the flashlight and bolted for the RV, my heart pounding in my chest, my legs moving on pure adrenaline. The ground was uneven and I stumbled more than once, but I didn't dare look back. I could hear it behind me, crashing through the underbrush with a terrifying speed that made my blood run cold. I reached the RV, fumbling with the door handle in my panic. I could feel the creature's hot breath on the back of my neck as I finally wrenched the door open and threw myself inside. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage it. Through the window, I could see the creature. It circled the RV, its massive form blocking out the starlight. It let out another of those terrible screams, a sound that reverberated through the metal of the RV and seemed to shake me to my very bones. I scrambled into the driver's seat, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life and I floored the gas pedal. The RV lurched forward, tires spinning in the soft earth before finding purchase. I tore out of the clearing and onto the narrow forest road, branches scraping against the sides of the RV like desperate fingers trying to hold me back. In the rearview mirror, I saw the creature burst out of the tree line, its eyes glinting in the darkness. It was gaining on me, its massive limbs propelling it forward with terrifying speed. The RV's tires skidded on the loose gravel as I took a sharp turn, the vehicle tilting dangerously before righting itself. But the thing kept coming, relentless, unstoppable. I knew there was no outrunning it, not on this road, not in this vehicle. And then, without warning, it leapt. A massive, impossible leap that carried it over the RV, landing with a thud on the road in front of me. I swerved, barely missing it, but the RV hit a patch of loose gravel and skidded sideways. I felt a moment of weightlessness as the RV tipped, then a sickening crunch as it slammed into a tree. The impact threw me forward, my head slamming into the steering wheel. For a moment, everything went black. When I came to, the first thing I noticed was the silence. The engine had died and the forest around me was as quiet as a tomb. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, aware of a warm trickle of blood running down my forehead. The creature was gone. I don't know how long I'd been unconscious, but there was no sign of the monstrous thing that had chased me. I sat there for a long moment, my breath coming in ragged gasps, waiting for it to reappear. But the forest remained still and silent. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself up in the seat. The windshield was a spider's web of cracks and steam hissed from the crumpled hood. The RV was totaled, its front end wrapped around the trunk of a massive fir tree. I fumbled with the door handle, my movements clumsy and uncoordinated. When I finally managed to push the door open, I half fell out of the RV, landing hard on the gravel road. The cool night air hit me like a slap, clearing some of the fog from my mind. I staggered to my feet, using the RV for support. My whole body ached and my head throbbed where it had hit the steering wheel. But I was alive, Somehow I was still alive. I looked around, half expecting the creature to come charging out of the trees again, to finish what it had started. But the forest remained still. The only sound the crackling of the damaged engine and the gentle rustle of leaves in the night breeze. I don't know how long I stood there, just staring at the wreckage, trying to piece together what had happened. My mind was a fog, the events of the night swirling together in a chaotic blur. But one thing was clear. I couldn't stay there. With shaking hands, I managed to gather what little I could from the RV. My backpack, a bottle of water, my phone, miraculously unbroken, but with no signal, and a small first aid kit. I hesitated for a moment, then grabbed the tire iron from under the seat. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it made me feel a little less vulnerable. As I stepped away from the wreck, the forest seemed to close in around me. Every shadow held a potential threat. Every rustle of leaves made me flinch, but I forced myself to keep moving. I knew I had to find help, or at least get back to civilization. I started walking, following the gravel road. I had no idea if I was heading toward safety or deeper into danger, but I couldn't bring myself to venture off the road into the dark forest. My flashlight was gone, lost in my mad dash to escape the creature, so I had to rely on the faint moonlight filtering through the trees to guide my way. As I walked, my mind raced. What was that thing? How could something like that exist? I'd always prided myself on my rational scientific mindset. I dealt in facts and measurable, quantifiable data, but what I'd seen tonight defied all logic, all reason. It simply couldn't be real. And yet the ache in my body and the wreck of my RV were very real reminders that what I'd experienced was no dream or hallucination. I don't know how long I walked. Hours blended together, each bend in the road looking the same as the last. My legs ached, my head throbbed, and fear was a constant companion. Every snapping twig, every rustle in the underbrush made me whirl around, tire iron raised, ready to face the monster again. But it never came. Whatever that thing was, it seemed content to let me go. Or maybe it was still out there watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. The thought made me quicken my pace, ignoring the protests of my battered body. As the first light of dawn began to seep through the trees, I finally saw something that gave me hope. A battered wooden sign pointing towards a ranger station 5 miles down a forking road. My relief was so profound I almost wept. Those 5 miles were the longest of my life. Every step was an effort, my body running on nothing but adrenaline and the desperate need to reach safety. But finally, as the sun crested the horizon, I saw it, a small wooden building with a green roof. The words Tillamook State Forest Ranger Station painted above the door. I practically fell against the door, my fists pounding on the wood. "Help," I croaked, my voice hoarse from hours of disuse. "Please, is anyone there?" The door swung open, revealing a startled-looking ranger. He took in my battered appearance, the wild look in my eyes, and quickly ushered me inside. "Good Lord, son, what happened to you?" I opened my mouth, then closed it again. How could I possibly explain what I'd seen? Who would believe me? I settled for a simplified version of the truth. There was something in the forest. My RV crashed. I've been walking all night. The ranger, a kind-faced man in his 50s named Bob, didn't press for details. He sat me down, brought me water and a first aid kit, and called for medical assistance. As we waited for the paramedics to arrive, he tried to keep me talking, probably worried about shock or concussion. "What were you doing out there alone?" he asked gently. I let out a bitter laugh, trying to get away from it all. Guess I succeeded a little too well. When the paramedics arrived, they checked me over, cleaned and bandaged my head wound, and recommended I go to the hospital for a more thorough examination. I nodded numbly, beyond arguing. As they were loading me into the ambulance, Bob approached, his face creased with concern. "Listen, son," he said quietly. "I don't know what you saw out there, but you're not the first. There have been stories, rumors. Just be careful who you talk to about this, all right?" I stared at him, a chill running down my spine despite the warm morning sun. He knew something, or at least suspected, but before I could ask any questions, the paramedics closed the ambulance doors and we were off. In the following days, as I recovered in the hospital, I had a lot of time to think. The police came to take my statement about the crash. I gave them the same story I'd given Bob. Vague details about swerving to avoid an animal, losing control on the gravel road. They seemed satisfied, though I caught a few odd looks, probably wondering what I was doing so deep in the forest in the middle of the night. I was discharged after a few days, diagnosed with a mild concussion, various cuts and bruises, and what the doctors diplomatically referred to as acute stress reaction. In other words, they thought I was traumatized, maybe hallucinating. Part of me wanted to believe them, to dismiss what I'd seen as the product of fear and concussion. But I knew better. I haven't been back to the Tillamook State Forest since that night. I don't think I ever will. My love for the wilderness, once so central to who I was, has been tainted. Now when I look at the trees on the horizon, I don't see peace or beauty. I see shadows, and I wonder what might be lurking within them. Sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the darkness presses in, I hear that sound again. That low, rumbling noise that doesn't belong in this world. And I wonder about what's out there, about the things that lurk in the spaces between what we know and what we fear to know. I think about what my mom used to say, about life being a series of calculated risks. She was right in a way, but now I know that some risks can't be calculated, that there are things in this world that defy all logic and reason, and sometimes the best we can do is survive the encounter and live to tell the tale. As for me, I've returned to my life in the city. I go to work, I see friends, I try to pretend that everything is normal, but I know it's not. I've seen behind the veil, glimpsed a world beyond our understanding, and I can never unsee it. So I keep moving forward one day at a time, always aware of the shadows at the edge of my vision. And I wonder, not for the first time, what other secrets the wilderness might be hiding, waiting for the next unsuspecting visitor to stumble upon them.